My name is John Draper. I'm the Vice President of Research and Training at the Stem Cell Network. And it's my job just to welcome you here today and just say a few words. So maybe I'll start by saying that there's hundreds, maybe thousands of possible trajectories that your career following a graduate and postdoctoral studies, but which is right for you? And I think only you can answer that, but choosing any career path relies on knowing which roles are available and understanding the qualifications and experiences necessary for securing that role. Having this kind of insight can be a challenge, and I think at all career stages, but it is particularly difficult early in your career. It's certainly something I wrestled with when I was at the trainee stage, and look where I ended up. So for this reason, SCN and MBD, which is the Medicine by Design, have teamed up to host this series, which will highlight a wide variety of careers available after a degree in the life sciences. Month by month, we will hear from a diverse range of individuals who started out where you are now and have moved on to industry, government, not-for-profit, or non-research roles, for instance, in academia. We aim to build a career role reference that provides you with the information you need to make the best career decisions for you. So it's a tall order, but we've got some great speakers who are going to help you in making those decisions as well. We have other training events occurring monthly, both Medicine by Design and Stem Cell Network. For instance, make sure you tune into SCN's Job Hunting Like a Pro webinar next week on Tuesday, September 20th, which will include tips and tricks from recruiters for securing your next role. Check out both of our websites and our social media for many other opportunities from our organizations that we offer throughout the year, including workshops, seminars, and symposia. And don't forget to sign up for our newsletters and be notified of upcoming events. The links for signing up to these email newsletters are on our websites. With that, it gives me pleasure to hand over to Allison Brown, who is Medicine by Design's Executive Director, and who will say a few words about our organizations.
Thanks very much, John, and welcome everyone today. And in particular, thank you to our inaugural speakers, Dr. Laura Smith and Dr. Stephanie Fisher. Looking forward to hearing from you both. For those of you that aren't familiar with Medicine by Design, I'm sure many of you are, but we're a convergence hub that is based at the University of Toronto, but that also includes the various affiliated hospitals with U of T. And we broadly bring together scientists, engineers, and clinicians to conceive and translate regenerative medicine approaches to transforming human health. I won't say too much more than what John has already said, other than to say that, Stem Cell Network and Medicine by Design have worked informally together over the last number of years, but then earlier this year, formalized our partnership and focused our partnership on training. I think collectively our organizations have trained over 9,000 graduate students and postdocs. So the number is really impressive, and there's just so much opportunity for all of you, no matter what field you go into. So I hope this series gives you a flavor for the options that are out there. Certainly, as John mentioned, when I was graduating, it was a daunting process, and I found myself in a small startup company based at U of T, but I won't bore you with the details after that. But I popped up many years later back at the University of Toronto. So there you go. So with no further ado, I guess I am passing the floor over to Laura, who will give our first talk.
So I'll go ahead and introduce Laura. So thank you, John and Allison, for your opening remarks. And Allison said, we're happy to welcome Dr. Laura Smith as our first speaker. Dr. Smith is a principal scientist and team lead at AmacaThera. She leads a team of 6 scientists in quality control and R&D activities for AmacaThera's pipeline. And I'm sure we'll hear a lot more about that. So Laura, please go ahead and get us started. And I need to share my screen, so I'll do that now.
Great. Thanks, Ellie, and thanks for everyone for joining. So we can start with the next slide. So currently I'm a principal scientist at AmacaThera, which is a startup out of the University of Toronto. And my background is I have a PhD in chemical engineering and applied chemistry, which was cross-appointed with IBBME. And before that, a bachelor's in chemistry. Next slide, please. So just a little bit on my timeline. So I did my undergraduate degree at McGill University, where I did an honors chemistry degree, focusing on bioorganic chemistry. Throughout my undergrad degree, I did intern during the summers, once at an analytical lab with a mining focus. And then the next couple of years doing summer student work at various labs around at McGill and also at McMaster. After graduating, actually, I wasn't super keen on going to grad school. So I actually went and looked for a job with my B.Sc. I found it quite challenging, but I did land a role in sales. So I worked with a company called North Spec Chemicals. They were a supplier for polymer materials for coatings, mostly automobile applications. And really during that time, I became introduced to polymer technologies and kind of got me interested again in doing research. And around that time while I was working, I started looking into grad schools and interviewed at the University of Toronto. Met with my supervisor, Molly Shoichet, and we, I think we really clicked. I liked the work that she was doing and thought it was really cool and got me really excited. And so I decided to enroll into a PhD program, chemical engineering. Soon, around the time I was preparing to defend, I was speaking with Molly about next options and I was quite interested in the work that she was doing at her company called AmacaThera. So it's a startup out of her lab. And I thought that with my skill set in chemistry, as well as with my knowledge of the platform, that I'd be able to help. And so I started out actually as an intern during while I was writing up my thesis, and then a role as a senior scientist from 2020 to 2022. And then at the beginning of this year, I was promoted to a principal scientist at AmacaThera. Next slide, please. So just a little bit of background about what our company does, just for those of you who might be interested or not super familiar with the work coming out of Molly's lab. But what AmacaThera is doing is we're working on commercializing an invention out of Dr. Shoichet's lab, which is a proprietary biomaterial, which we call AmacaGel. And this is designed for the local sustained delivery of different therapeutics. So the first asset in our pipeline is one we call AMT-143, and this is a local anesthetic drug suspended in the gel, intended for post-surgical pain management. So this product had already been in development when I joined the company, and so we're currently manufacturing this material for clinical trials. So that's around the work that I do in terms of quality control. But perhaps, what I really find great about my job is now what I'm leading and working on is developing other prototypes for other indications and really figuring out where this platform can have great impact in different indications. Next slide. So a quick glance of others who might be in my role. So typical background is a PhD level scientist in life sciences or engineering. What I do, in a nutshell is I manage the activities of a team of 6 scientists and basically align everyone's activities towards developing our portfolio of pipeline assets. So in terms of key skills that I find I rely on throughout my work, Definitely the technical side comes into play, experiment design, data analysis, and method development. But really, what I've found quite exciting and quite new is that I'm really leaning on some and learning new soft skills, so such as project management, resource management, strategic thinking, and running productive meetings with, since there are so many people involved. So when I was, in grad school and considering what else I could do, I looked at academia. I looked at being a bench scientist, which was really what I wanted to do, but in the industry setting. I considered consulting and switching to a business role, and I also considered big pharma, although I'll say that I didn't consider that too much because I wanted to stay in Canada. I wanted to stay in Toronto, and we just don't really have that option just yet. So next slide. So typical activities. As I mentioned, I manage the scientists, but the work that they do ranges from analytical method development, which I find quite interesting because I'm leaning a lot there on my undergrad degree in chemistry. So, how to run an HPLC, how to validate a method, how to make sure that, everything is reproducible. I also manage some in vivo work, which is new to me. I never did any throughout my PhD, but we work with contract organizations as well as do some of the work ourselves. And then also lots of in vitro proof of concept work. In line with working on a material that is going into the clinic, there's a lot of quality control that has to go into that. So I organize any of the in-house tests that we have to do. We also work with contract organizations who are, have all of the certifications, but bringing some of the methods in-house also allows us some control and allows us to get answers quicker. One of my favorite parts of my role is meeting with key opinion leaders to understand the feasibility of an idea or a prototype in a specific indication. So I'm a scientist, I'm an engineer, not a physician. And, similar to a lot of the other people in my company, they come from biology, chemistry backgrounds. And so it's great to get in contact with, let's say, a physician with a specialization in whatever indication we're thinking of going into, and to really drill down on, is this a good idea? Would this work? And have that give and take where they even suggest things to us and iterate on those meetings. Another key activity is collaborating with the team who works on business development, giving them scientific input and really seeing what they're putting together through a scientific lens. As we really are an R&D, we're a science company, so giving that input is quite important. Next slide. So highlights why my role is important. It's creating alignment in the activities of our small team. So often, with a very small team and a lot of ideas floating around, we really have to be careful about how we spend our time in order to get the most meaningful information as fast as possible. So really, organizing the way that the others work to align with what we want to do, what the company's milestones and objectives are. I really enjoy my role because my activities day to day are never predictable. They're all over the place in a good way. I get to learn directly from experts, like, the top people in their field when I interview key opinion leaders. And I'm learning a lot on the job, which, like others who are pursuing academia, we love to learn. And also something to point out, in the startup environment, I'm also exposed to the business operations and manufacturing activities, fields where I might have never interfaced with those roles at all. And I'm learning a lot about how that works. Challenges associated with my role. So there is a lack of security, funding is funding is raised every so often, and there is a little bit of a feeling of, if we don't raise the money, how much time do we have left as a company? So that's a little bit unnerving at times, but I think it's quite exciting. The workloads are unpredictable sometimes, but mostly I do keep a 9 to 5. And then, it's a challenge and an enjoyment that there is a lot of learning on the job. Future opportunities. So I could grow within the role to, to more responsibility in a director level role. I could pivot to a larger biotech or pharma company, likely narrowing my focus. And I can also envision working in a project management role with what I've learned through this time. So in terms of my advice and what I've found helpful throughout my PhD, so attend seminars. If you're here, you're already in a great place, and get an idea of what you do. And I think it's also really important to get an idea of what you don't want to do. So invest in your soft skills. So for me, this was a lot of reading on my own. LinkedIn Learning and YouTube are great resources. And so for me, this was a lot of learning about managerial practices and also leadership. So also something that was, important to me was my network. So reach out to the people around you to find out what's the scene here. Like if you want to stay in Toronto, if you want to stay in Canada, where are the places you can work, and who are the ones who are most likely to be expanding soon? In this vein, like leverage your network. So think of look up professors, committee members, see have they started companies? Can they introduce you to someone who has? So oftentimes I think it's difficult, like as a grad student, to think like someone will want to help you, but I promise you that more often than not, people do want to help you, and they do want to see you succeed. And then the other, pieces, I would urge people to consider startups as a great place to start your career. You really learn very, very quickly, and you get exposure to people and situations where really you'd never think you'd end up otherwise. But it is a little bit scary. It's a little bit risky, but in my opinion, it's all part of the fun. Ellie, you're muted.
Great. Fantastic. Thank you, Laura, for that excellent talk. So as a reminder, we'll be taking questions for both talks after our next speaker. So think of your questions and we'll be happy to address them after our second speaker, who is Dr. Stephanie Fisher. Dr. Fisher is a senior scientist with 5 years of process development experience at BlueRock Therapeutics in Toronto, leading a small team of associates and scientists developing stem cell-derived cell therapies. So Stephanie, please go ahead and share your screen and I'll hand it over to you.
Okay. Oh, sorry, I think I'm sharing the wrong screen. Just a second.
Yeah, no rush.
Okay, can you see the full presentation?
Yes, that looks great.
Okay. Thank you so much to the Stem Cell Network for inviting me to give some insights into my career. So I'm Stephanie Fisher. I'm a senior scientist in process development at BlueRock Therapeutics. And I have a PhD in chemical engineering. I actually did my PhD with Laura, so you can get an idea of what kind of different career trajectories you can have from the same starting point. So a brief overview of my career timeline. So in 2017, when I was nearing the end of my PhD, I had an opportunity to do an internship at BlueRock Therapeutics. At the time, the company was pretty new, pretty small. I had just finished doing some of the lab-based component of my PhD. So I took it as a great opportunity I had to write my thesis and finalize papers evenings and weekends while doing the internship, so it was a lot of work. I don't necessarily recommend doing that, but it did pay off because when I finished my PhD, I was hired on as a scientist in BlueRock Therapeutics. My internship was a bit more focused on some of the business side of the company and helping out with some of the early IP work. But then when I transitioned to a full-time scientist at BlueRock Therapeutics, I actually joined the process development team. And I've been there ever since. I've moved up a couple levels as a scientist, and I'm currently a senior scientist managing a small team. So a quick glance at the senior scientist role. And when I'm speaking of a senior scientist, this can have different names at different companies. So they might be referred to as principal scientists. Sometimes senior scientists are more entry level at different companies. So make sure you do your research for a particular company you're interested in. So when I'm talking about a senior scientist, I mean someone who usually has a PhD and a few years of experience. So typically this background would be a PhD with maybe 5 years of experience in industry, or a bachelor's or master's level with maybe about 15 years of experience. It really depends on the company and individual how much experience is required. And typically the education would be in a life or biological sciences, or an engineering background, chemical biomedical engineering, or related fields. And this is speaking of a scientist who is in like the cellular gene therapy space. And what I do in a sentence is I lead a team of research associates and scientists, and we develop manufacturing processes for cell-based therapies. Some of the key skills in this position, it requires a lot of collaboration, not only within your own team, but other teams within the company. You need a lot of risk management skills. You really need to be able to identify issues before they even happen and come up with a way to solve them. It also requires a lot of leadership if you're managing a team. Knowledge of cell culture platforms and scale up is required in process development, as well as statistical analysis for experimental planning and data analysis. And some of the other careers I considered, I looked at being a scientist in earlier stage research and development. Since my background was more biomaterials, I looked at formulation, regulatory jobs, and IP. So just an overview of what is process development, because I know that in graduate school, you don't really know about this kind of role. So process development really bridges the gap between research and development and manufacturing. So your research and development usually is early discovery work, but they establish processes, and it's typically done in smaller lab scale. And then process development takes these processes and it gets it ready for GMP production. So it's a lot of process understanding. So we do a lot of DOEs, or design of experiments, and that can help understand how your input parameters impact the final product. That also helps to create a more robust process. Process development also includes a lot of risk assessment work. So this could be looking at different failure modes of your process, risks of raw materials, and scale up into the larger scale that will be used in manufacturing is also a key component of process development. So typical activities, not just in my role, but across like a typical team in process development or research, it usually has the highest seniority scientists or managers or directors. They lead a lot of the programs, larger scale projects, and they'll do a lot of strategy. As a smaller company, they'll do more company-based strategy, and larger companies do a bit more project program strategy at that role. Your scientists and more experienced RAs, they'll do a lot of the experimental planning, data analysis, experimental execution, they will really lead experiments and smaller projects within the larger programs. And then the entry-level RAs, they'll typically do experimental execution, but they also may do some planning and data analysis depending on their skill level and the size of the company. A scientist or experienced RA doing some of the smaller projects might expect to be in the lab about 50% of the time, whereas an entry-level RA, most of their job will be in the lab, maybe about 80% of the time. I also mentioned, because I know that there'll often be a lot of confusion because in academia, research associates are typically above a postdoc level. However, in industry, it's reversed, and RAs are at a level below scientists. So watch out for that when you're applying to positions, because you'll often get a lot of postdocs applying to RA levels, and typically PhDs won't be considered for that role. It's more of a bachelor's or master's level role. So some of the highlights and challenges of my position. So I'm a bit biased, but I think that process development is critical to a company, is the heart of a company, because without process development, you don't have a manufacturing process or commercial process. And the challenges associated with process development is really why I like my role. So in cell and gene therapy, you will have complex processes and you're producing complex products. So your path to developing and understanding your process is not simple. It involves a lot of interaction with other teams and a lot of collaboration, and it's a really dynamic position. And some of the future career opportunities for this position, I could move into higher management. I could stay a senior scientist and just develop technically, or I could look at transitioning into more product development strategy positions. And my advice, if you are interested in process development, some of the skills that are really beneficial to have, the first one is really strong soft skills. So strong communication and a good collaboration, those go together. You could be a really strong scientist, but if nobody wants to work with you, you won't go anywhere. We also really value having DOE expertise. So this is not to be confused with just designing experiments. DOEs are very specific. It includes screening models, full factorial. It's not a skill that a lot of graduate students will often have. So if this skill can be demonstrated, it's really beneficial when applying to jobs. It demonstrates not only statistical capabilities, but also that you can efficiently use your time and resources. Previous experience in GMP is also beneficial, but this is not expected for entry level. This is a skill that you can really only gain in industry. The ability to handle large sets of data is another really valuable skill that often isn't seen in new graduates, but is something I wish I had done more of during my PhD, and it's a skill that's really beneficial in industry. And experience with common cell characterization assays is very beneficial, but this is a skill that's pretty common in applicants. So while you need to have it, it's not something that will make you stand out on your resume. And then finally, if you're interested in process development, getting experience with some larger scale cell culture platforms and having an understanding of scale-up parameters is also really beneficial. And I think some of my advice to people looking for a job in this field, it really echoes what Laura said. I think getting some of the industry experience through like internships, and I think smaller companies and startups are a great way to get into the fields. They often are more willing to take new graduates as well, and you can gain some beneficial experience. And I'll hand things back to Ellie for the question period.
Great, thank you so much. On behalf of Stem Cell Network and Medicine by Design, I'd like to thank both Laura and Stephanie for fantastic talks.